just don't show the video behind your screen because I'll be watching the curling finals here.
Yeah.
Watch it. It's my son, the lead up for the Americans. U.S. is doing very well in the finals for gold, and it's incredibly tense. They just beat Italy. I don't remember who the. Oh, Great Britain. No, it's not. It's not. It's Sweden. It's Sweden. They beat them earlier.
Oh, don't spoil the ending.
Okay. The real event's happening like right now.
Okay, we're a little punchy today. Welcome everyone to the February 10th edition of the Planning Commission, Portland Planning Commission. I'll be your chair, Steph Routh. With me, we have a full house in person. This is amazing. I'm just gonna kill my laptop after this. I don't even have to look at it. With us is Commissioner Thompson, Commissioner Brannon, Commissioner Ames, Commissioner Alvarado, myself, Commissioner Knowles, Vice Chair Spivak, Commissioner O'Meara, and Vice Chair Pollock. Today is the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub Policy Project continuation. I'm curious if there are any items of interest. We have already covered that curling is what everyone is watching. Are there any other items of interest from commissioners today? I'll say, as the liaison to the Transportation System Plan Community Advisory Committee, we're picking that up later this month. So that's running apace after a couple of months hiatus. And now to Director Diefendorfer for the director's report, please.
Thank you so much, Chair Routh. Having trouble with the button over here. Pardon me. Good afternoon, commissioners. Happy February. We're already into the second month of the year. Just have a few quick announcements, things we've been updating you on regularly, but just to keep up the pattern here. A couple projects that the commission has made recommendations on, as you know, are headed to council. The Affordable Housing Opportunities Project is going to the full council tomorrow, actually, time certain 9:45. So that's great. That hopefully is among the final steps of that project. And then the Public Infrastructure E-Zone project is actually scheduled before the Climate Resilience and Land Use Committee of the City Council. You all unanimously recommended approval of that project on August 12th. It is going to the committee on this coming Thursday, 2/12. So we'll have more to update on that. And then I just wanted to share that a few of the commissioners, I believe Commissioner Thompson and Vice Chair Spivak and Chair Routh, met with Brandon Spencer-Hartle. He's our historic preservation staff who's also working on this design review resolution that we discussed at a previous meeting. This report that council has requested that staff prepare with recommendations about the design review process and any potential improvements. So thank you to the commissioners, chair, vice chair, who met with Brandon earlier today. I think we used those individuals as kind of a focus group. Those were commissioners who were either a part of the commission, I believe, when DOZA was, DOZA is the Design Overlay Zone Amendment Project, when that was adopted, and then also, of course, Commissioner Thompson as an architect and somebody who's in the design field. So we appreciate your input. Those are all inputs that we're kind of taking and considering as we develop the report with the recommendations. So thank you for your time on that. We appreciate that. And of course, thank you to all of you for your participation in all the various work groups related to the CI Hub project. You will hear more about that shortly. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Great. Now on to the consent agenda, which is the minutes from the January 20 meeting. Who would like the great honor of moving our meeting minutes?
Oh. Seconded.
Okay. We've got Alvarado motioning, Pollock seconding. All in favor? Great. All right, it is passed. And now we move on to the CEI Hub Policy Project. Are there any disclosures? I'll say I've had a few emails sent to me from individuals, and I'm happy to send those via email of just an accounting of a few of those. Okay, Tom Armstrong, please take us away.
Good afternoon. For the record, Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and we are here for work session number 3 on the CI Hub Policy Project. Just a little bit on where we're at in the process and where we're headed. So today we wanted to continue the discussion and explore some potential amendment concepts and have you all discuss and hopefully provide us as direction on amendments that you would like us to work up. And then we'll actually come back on March 10th for further discussion of those amendments and then hopefully vote on those amendments and a overall recommendation to council. For today, what we thought we would start with is have you all debrief on the work group discussions and specifically the meetings with the DEQ staff from the fuel tank seismic stability program, and just share between what resonated with you all. There were 2 people that were unable to make those meetings, so just sharing what you heard, what you found relevant to our deliberations. And then we would start working through the issues, starting with some of the questions that came up around transloading, both in terms of the development standards and the discretionary review criteria. We'll have that discussion go on at 2 o'clock. We have 2 structural engineers from Portland Permitting and Development will join us and give you all a presentation discussion around the building code standards, what it means to be risk category 4, and then talk about some of the examples from the PDX fuel facility and some of the measures that they're doing to meet those standards. And then following that, we thought we would continue the discussion with some questions around the transfer discretionary review process, and then the jet fuel storage needs, and then if there's time, any other issues that you wanted to start discussing. And then, again, we can schedule additional work groups over the next couple of weeks and work up more formal amendment concepts, language for your consideration on March 10th. So that's where we're going today. So I guess just want to sort of turn it over to you all to talk about what you heard in the work group meetings, and particularly what you heard in the DEQ meetings. We have a work group meeting coming up after this meeting with a few of you to talk about any potential changes to the comp plan policy language and to further explore the question around how to address the non-fuel hazardous materials, which is one of the topics that came up last time. And then we'll be looking to schedule a couple of work group meetings to talk about the drawdown program and to sort of help put some context on that for that discussion on March 10th. So, turn it over to you.
Sweet. Do you have thoughts on energy, electrical needs, capacity?
Well, that was a week ago or more, and I've been busy doing nothing for the last week, so will struggle to remember. I think what makes sense, might make sense is for the staff to summarize what the memo says. Has the memo been distributed to the rest of the commission?
No, not yet.
Did not. So folks wrote a really good memo. The thing I really love about planners, well, I love many things about planners, but planners are good writers. And I think the memo reflects some really good writing and some good technical information. So, Tom, honestly, it'd be better for one of you guys to summarize what the memo says. It was, my conclusion from it was that there is adequate electrical energy for our future needs, at least during the future as defined by this project. So that was important information for me to have as part of my consideration. But is there something else you want to add? I don't have the memo in front of me,
Yeah, I don't
and
have.
I didn't know I was going to be up
Yeah.
first.
I don't have that memo in front of me, but we had staff from our climate policy team who really tracks the sort of energy transition issues. Look at that issue, pull some relevant references, especially to the what you've seen, the Oregon Energy Strategy. And again, as Commissioner Knowles said, the takeaway was that when it comes to the electrical vehicle transition, that because it is so a dispersed, distributed demand, that it's not expected to tax the grid, to tax our energy supplies, and in some ways can help, especially when you think about charging at night or charging at off-peak hours, can help smooth out the grid demand. And so my recollection from our discussion is what you said, is that it sort of addressed your concerns about how electrical supply being a barrier to the EV transition, which would then not bend the fuel demand curve as much as what we're showing in the parametrics model.
I think it'd be worth distributing
Yeah,
it
we'll
to the commission.
send it out after the meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Knowles. Are there any other questions or thoughts around electrical needs, capacity, transmission? Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on. And forgive me, this slide is new to me because I did not make the last officers meeting, so my apologies. I'm coming in hot too, so forgive me. Discretionary reviews and transloading. Commissioners Brandon Spivak and Thompson, have you had a chance to chat? Thoughts?
As I came out of that, I thought staff was going to try and draft up some amendment ideas. So I don't have that in front of me, but perhaps because it was a week ago for us too, we could you refresh us what direction we were asking for?
I think specifically that's the focus of the discussion, and we'll get into that and hopefully reflect that conversation in terms of both the discretionary review criteria and what some options might be, as well as addressing some of the transloading issues, especially the ones that Commissioner Thompson was raising with respect to replacement tanks. And so we have some stuff queued up to talk about this afternoon.
So maybe I should check. So is this to go through the work groups? So after this 6 items, you've got some stuff queued up to actually talk through the items that came up with the work groups.
Yeah, I think we wanted to create the time. There was a lot around, especially around the DEQ meetings and what you heard, and reflecting on the last meeting, there was a lot of questions around how our zoning code limitations would work with the DEQ program. We had wanted to try and get the DEQ staff here today. They have a conflict down in Salem and we're unable to attend. And so we wanted to provide space, time for you all to talk about what you heard. Do you have lingering issues, questions? Share what you learned in what you heard from DEQ staff, and see where we need to work from there in terms of syncing up our requirements versus the DEQ requirements.
It sounds like we're going to get into the details a little bit more later, but I do appreciate creating space for us to have the dialogue, because sometimes we're like, there's not enough time to deliberate, and so now we have that. I wanted to participate in this group because there were a lot of testimony concerns around transloading loopholes, and when I started digging into the different allowances for new transloading infrastructure or expanded transloading facilities, I also felt like there were some inconsistencies between the different allowable conditions for that. So specifically, there's the transloading facility expansion review, which is a discretionary type 3 review with a public hearing. And that part was really clear to me. There's some follow-up questions related to the definition of public benefit within that review, and I think we'll probably get to that later. But then the other categories that allowed expanded transloading facilities were for replacement tanks, and then the storage tank capacity transfer. And it seemed to me like we should either constrain the capacity of the transloading facility if it is just a one-for-one transfer or a new tank, because otherwise there's not parity between, if you want to just do transloading and you're going to increase it, then you have to do a public process. But if you're doing a new tank, a whole bunch of stuff can go along with that. So I think we spent most of the time exploring that, and there may be some nascent ideas about amendments within there, but I think that I remain really interested in a number of amendments within the transloading category.
Any others? Thank you so much. Yeah.
I mean, I also appreciate it. It was great brainstorming with staff. That was nice. It's easier to do in small groups than full meetings. I think that the takeaways I have just from a couple of these is, one is that the parametric analysis is all about Oregon's use of fuels, and that's not the only potential use of the CEI hub. And the other piece, it really was helpful to hear from DEQ how they got a lot of attention on this issue, which is great. And in many ways, we've hooked to their reviews and rely on them to enforce the requirements to make tanks safer. And we're counting on them. They have a more broad definition of the hazardous substances that they regulate than our project has, which we may be able to address, we may not, we'll see. But that comes down to non-hazardous fuel discussion. That's it.
Well, unless Jet Fuel and Northwest Natural, if y'all had chatted and had anything to share, we can go straight into DEQ. Commissioner Ames?
Yeah, I think the thing that really made me interested in this item is something that Commissioner Knowles said about, we're banking on this parametrics study, and what if it's wrong? We've got an opportunity through, the adoption of, or greater adoption, I should say, of electric vehicles, and electric trucks. There's options there, but, there's not a viable near-term option for electric planes. And so just in thinking about the influence this new amazing airport that we have on our economy, and exports, all that kind of stuff around aviation. I left there thinking that, and I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but that jet fuel should potentially be set aside, and that's why I think we kind of talked about what does an amendment look like around jet fuel. On the Northwest Natural side, I left there thinking that Northwest Natural had other potential options to address the when they, what is the term, during the peak season, surge seasons, yeah, that potentially they had other locations where that could be accommodated, and that may be more appropriate given, the current state of this location. So that's what I learned.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's been a lot. I just want to appreciate commissioners and staff. Like, that's a lot to stand up in just a couple of weeks, to have a lot of conversations of which I was primarily not a part. So thank you for reading me in as well. The DEQ meetings. Yes, Commissioner O'Mara.
Yeah, I want to, Commissioner O'Mara, for the record, want to echo staff appreciation for everything you've stood up and continue to respond to for our requests for more information. For me, so we met with DEQ just yesterday, I think. Yeah, it's been a week already. And for me, a few things that stood out. First up, that within the 10-year ramp timeline, there is not any requirement that is different for facilities that are at high risk of failure. And so that was a little surprising to me that it's the same timeline regardless of current facility condition. And I don't know if that's anything that the city can interact with, but it didn't make sense to me in terms of why there wouldn't be accelerated requirements for facilities that are at higher risk of failure. It's still just the 10-year timeline. Additionally, that there was a funding pool established that currently has a zero balance. So when we talk about incentives, and I know that came up at our last commission meeting, is there anything that the city can look at, again, for financial incentives? Because it was made clear that the state doesn't have any additional resources at this time to assist operators with this transition. And then I think those were the two. I have another note and I can't read my handwriting, so it might come back to me after others chime in, but those were two big takeaways for me. Thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner Brennan.
Gosh. I think it's on.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Brannon, for the record. I was mostly concerned about how agencies cooperate, and they didn't say that they either declined or in support of what BPS had proposed, but that there was nothing that was going to conflict with it. And so they said they would have stated that. So that was actually good to hear, is that we're not creating two different policies that don't have alignment. So that was good to hear. And I liked some bias. I had followed the program since it was supposed to have started, so it was nice to see its progress, and that a lot of the actual purview of it is with engineers and people who have that expertise that maybe the city doesn't particularly have. So I know that there's another layer here that's helping create these, make these tanks a little bit more safe. That being said, we can't slack off on what's happening in this policy at all, but I think those were the high level takeaways.
Yeah, they provided a general overview of the program, and it probably repeated some of what BPS staff had already shared with us, but with the technical information, sometimes I need to hear it like 2 or 3 times before it finally sinks in, but I think I'm getting there. I shared Mary Rain's concern about the 10-year timeline and how that doesn't necessarily correspond to risk. So maybe we can just take a follow-up there. We spent a lot of time talking about the approaches that would be allowed for different facilities, and there are basically 2 different paths. There's spill containment, which allows for a spillage of 1 barrel maximum. And that might be an appropriate approach for existing facilities. The alternate approach is the risk category 4, so that's another area where it feels pretty aligned with the recommendations in the proposed draft. The risk category 4 would likely be for new facilities RMIPs. I think that the question for me that I'm still, I haven't totally bottomed out on, but I'm hoping to get there with Amit is the transloading criteria. I asked about that with DEQ and like what is the standard that the transloading infrastructure has to be designed to, and it's probably a me problem, but I didn't understand the response. They talked about the public process, confirming that all RMIPs will have a public hearing. They're also doing monthly meetings with the Linton Neighborhood Association. So I think it's positive that there's a way for ongoing public involvement from the DEQ side. They indicated that they did not do any economic assessment of the impacts of these I always want to call them RIMPs, but they're not. They're RMIPs. They didn't get into that, and so I was sort of curious to understand if they had anticipated the likelihood of operators stopping operations as a result of the uplift that the improvement plans necessitate, and it sounds like they just didn't go there. We talked about fire. And not from a wildfire standpoint, but from a seismically induced fire event. And they are including that in the scope of the RMIPs. And as part of that, there can be no assumption that municipal water will be available. I know that there was some testimony about like, well, what happens if there's a fire and you're assuming you're going to connect to the water main, and how does that work? And I think that they're pretty much on top of that. We talked about penalties, and it sounds like throughout the timeline, if they are out of compliance at any point, then penalties could be they could be leveraged. So, for example, they have to submit the original assessment report in a certain amount of time, and then they get comments back, and or they get a revision, and then if they're not responding within the stated review time, that would be an opportunity for the penalty. So that doesn't just start at the 10-year point. And then the last thing that we confirmed with them is that it's a seismic program. So there's still a little bit of this hole within the public testimony and the interest in air quality and in wildfire. And I think that there are some aspects of those that are just really hard to control for in the sort of program that DEQ has designed and within the zoning code. But I don't know what to do with that, but it definitely seems like a bit of a hole.
They did specify that their primary concern is spill prevention and safety along with that, and that they do require reports at different milestones at like 1, 3, and 5 years, I think. But to date, they've only received one from PDX Fuels, so.
Great, yeah, Commissioner O'Meara, please. Commissioner O'Meara, for the record, we also talked about what happens after year 10, and that was a big surprise around it. Sounded like there's no plan or responsibility for ongoing audits of any of these improvements that are completed in year 10. So it seemed like their approach was very much like project management, right? This is our scope. It's going to be done in 10 years. After that, it's out of our hands. So we were left with a big question around not only ongoing auditing of the improvements that are completed, but then what happens to new and proposed improvements after this 10-year period. So that was definitely a big question. Yeah.
Thank you.
We did not get there.
Okay. I really appreciated, I mean, we also talked about the 10-year time horizon and, recognizing that it's a state program. We had asked, what were some of the inputs, how did they arrive at 10 as opposed to 8 or 12? And there were some comments I didn't hear a level of specificity for, what were the drivers of that, but I do kind of feel that there's potential wiggle room. I didn't hear anything that would suggest 10 is hard, that we can play with that. That's mostly what I had.
Yeah, Commissioner Knowles.
So I guess I have a question for the folks who talked to DEQ. maybe you said this and I just missed it. Is there an option for us to do something more aggressive in terms of a timeline for seismic improvements? Did they say that would conflict with their program? I mean, I think it would, but did you get any sort of sense of how they felt about a more aggressive timeline, and what were the reasons for the 10-year seismic improvement timeline?
That was by statute in the bill itself when it passed. So that's like, they didn't come up with that. It's from what I've.
Yeah, it
No,
was
I
during the
think it
rulemaking.
was rulemaking.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
And they based it on a Washington state standard for a similar program.
Okay.
That when the seismic codes change, the Washington state terminals have 10 years to implement that seismic code. And so that's what ultimately they decided through the rulemaking process on how they set that 10-year timeframe.
I guess to your other question, we didn't ask about being more aggressive. I guess that feels like maybe a little too existential or something to like the plan that's in front of us, and there's like the course that we can stay on, which is try to work within the general parameters of the proposed draft and advance that and have some new policy in place sooner, versus like, this is not the right tack and we may want to look at doing something differently than DEQ, and we're going to try to take that on as a city, which is pretty different. And I haven't been as much in that headspace, frankly. So if others are, then let's talk about it. But I feel like I was just more in like if we tweak it, or if we put like, is it seismic category 4 or is it and in the zoning code, and not the question you're getting at.
Okay, thanks.
I think Commissioner Thompson, you did ask the question about whether they saw any conflicts or issues with the city's plan, and they did not. But we did not ask that question specifically. Yeah.
I'm also seeing as we're chatting, there's BPS staff. I wish that like you all had thought bubbles that I could read. Joan, Julia, and Shannon. But I remember asking that specifically, like, what were and I heard that it was kind of, I did not hear specific reasons for 10 years as opposed to a different time horizon. And I will say that I feel like that is borrowing from other jurisdictions, or, having a round number tends to be something that we do in policy. And I'm still not clear on, why 10, whether pulling up earlier, which I would be inclined, I will just say I would be inclined to do, would put us in arrears in some way.
I mean, I don't think we have direct influence over their timeline, so it would be a question of, are we going to try to do something within the purview of the zoning code that advances some of those same objectives? And what I've heard is that there would be an excessive amount of complexity in trying to do that, because this DEQ program is like, it's so site specific, and it's like this multi-step process. I don't really know why 10 years either, but they did say that the seismic assessments, whatever that long phrase is, they were due, was it June 2024? None of them are approved. Every operator has submitted one, I think, but they're in this like review churn. So they get them and they look at them and they're like, these are deficient. You need to go back and hire another geotechnical engineer, or do this or do that. And then they do all of that work and then put it back together and then go back to DEQ, and then just months elapse. And I think that that's like what the RMIP process sort of is. Maybe there's a way it could be more efficient, but yeah.
I will add, what I heard from the DEQ staff is that they looked at the 10-year time frame from the Washington State rules, and that the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, which was made up of many people, including Linton Neighborhood representatives achieved consensus on that, which was you can live with it, right? And so that's how they arrived at the 10-year timeframe. I will say it is difficult for the city to require seismic upgrades as a matter of a code change, right? Again, the example is when the codes change, we don't make everybody immediately upgrade their electrical panel, or we still have unreinforced masonry buildings out there that don't have seismic improvements. That's a state law kind of thing. What we can do is to offer incentives. There's very limited ones in the zoning code. We can have sort of or you all could have a direction, right? Continue to explore what other incentives the city might offer to help accelerate that. But as we get into some of these other areas, we can look at, well, what happens if they complete their RMIP early? You know, does that open the door essentially for expansion opportunities? That would be the incentive that's embedded in the zoning code. But I don't see a way that we can say, no, you need to do all these seismic improvements within 5 years or 6 years or whatever it is. It's just not the way the state law is structured around those building codes.
I just want to ask a clarifying question. The seismic standards are established in the state's building code, right? We just implement them, whether it's buildings or tanks, we just implement them through our local building codes. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So it's sort of like in the zoning code equivalent of a non-conforming use, right? And you're allowed to continue and operate until you do an improvement, such as you go to your house and you go to add an EV charger, and suddenly you have to upgrade your electrical panel, right? The city's not going to knock on your door and say, oh, no, sorry, that old electrical panel, you got to upgrade.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one thing I liked about the interaction with the state and the local is that all these site owners who've applied for their RMIPs and they're not approved yet, if they're going to try to upgrade their tanks or add transmission between tanks, an approval condition is to not only have adopted the RMIP, but be current on all the things the RMIP says they have to do. Because the RMIP is not the end of it. It's like, okay, I'll do this within 1 year, this within 3 years, this within 5 years. So it sort of motivates tank owners who might be inclined to drag out that process. If they actually want to do something different with their facility, they'll have to be on board with that process. And I realize just looking now that this is an education thing for me. I thought that the drawdown, which is where we are proposing some local control, was all in 17, but it's really in 33 and 17. And I'm realizing I don't know what this, like Title 33 says that at a certain date you have to be lower within by 2036. But then the summary document we have says Title 17 talks about drawdown. And I'm just wondering if staff could just help me understand which parts of it are in those two titles. Does that make sense? Somehow I had in my head that all drawdown was in 17, and that's not the case. It's in 33 also. Could someone clarify that? Thanks.
Hi, Shannon Buno for Planning and Sustainability. So the use limitation is centered on the amount of storage tank capacity. And because the drawdown program, which will be all detailed in Title 17, is going to make them draw down, the use limit then has to refer to how much they have on site after they go through that whole program. So there's no authorization for it particularly in Title 33. It'll be in Title 17.
So the Title 33 says, on or after October of 2036, the total amount of fossil fuels that can be stored on site in storage tanks is limited to 80% of the. So that's basically somehow you have to get there, and Title 17 is going to tell them how to get there.
Yes, and then enforce that 80%. the 20% drawdown.
Beyond just being out of compliance with the zoning code, which they would also be if they didn't do it, right?
That's true. I mean, if it doesn't happen at all, then we do have an issue with the zoning code. But
Okay, that helps me understand it.
predicated on that does happen through Title 17, the drawdown.
Okay, thanks.
Move on? All right. Let's talk about transloading. We wanted to talk about think about I think as Commissioner Thompson said before, there are certain situations where there is new or improved transloading facilities happening at these terminals. The first one for which we're establishing standards is those situations where you have a repair or replacement of an existing facility, and then the third one is built in conjunction with a replacement tank. So the replacement tank comes in and you want to hook it up to the rest of the terminal system. And then the third one is outside of those situations, is that if you want essentially a new or expanded transloading facility, that there is a discretionary review process that you could go to get that new transloading capacity. We wanted to first sort of discuss the issue that was raised that when we have a replacement tank, that it does not appear that there are any limits or requirements on how you hook that tank up to the rest of the system. And therefore, the amendment concept would be to add some requirements that says that the size of the pipes or the number of offloading racks that are associated with that new replacement tank can't be greater than what they're replacing essentially. And so that's sort of what we heard and looked at and are sort of the direction that as staff we think we could go to address this issue.
Seeing nods?
At the meeting, we had talked about pipe size, which that makes sense to me, like how much of the substance are you able to convey through a pipe of a given diameter. We didn't talk about the quantity of racks, and I don't really know what racks means. Like, what is a rack, and are we gonna, could a tank replacement at another location require some sort of different configuration that inherently, I don't know, entails more racks?
Yeah, so it could. My understanding is if you, there are storage tanks and there are blending tanks, and then a lot of this stuff goes out, say, via truck, right? Distributed from these big terminals via truck, and that the truck comes up and that they have these tanks that have the racks or the offloading racks. Think of it as the pumps. Like you go to a gas station, there's a series of pumps, they have tanks, they have blended fuels to certain formulas, premium, regular, whatever, and the truck pulls up and you offload it into the truck. That's the racking part of the transloading. If you had a tank system, that has 6 of those valves, you get 6. You don't get 8, because that in theory could let them turn over more trucks per hour or whatever. So if you're replacing that element, you get what you have. You don't get more. I think this has also been an issue at Zenith. They have a number of rail offloading racks where they actually bring in the product via rail, pump it off as part of their whole process, they've actually agreed to taking some of those racks out of service that they had put in. So, that we're just looking at making sure that's just sort of one element of the transloading facility that we could call out to make sure that you're replacing like for like. So does this seem like a viable concept that, we could work up into a formal code amendment? Are there, other questions or thoughts on this issue? Okay.
Okay.
All right, now we wanted to go to the next step, which is the discretionary review process that for expansion. So these are, I want to add 8 racks, or I want to add a new dock connection. And, as was mentioned, this would go through a type 3 quasi-judicial procedure. So that is a staff review, public comment, a staff report recommendation to a hearings officer, additional public comment, hearings officer decision that could be appealed to city council. And the approval criteria, the 3 approval criteria that we had was, demonstrating there's a public benefit for adding that expanded capacity, that public health and environmental risks are minimized to the extent practicable, and that the seismic risks have been minimized to the extent practicable or shown to be in compliance with their approved RMIP plan. There was a lot of questions about language. What is a public benefit? What does it mean to be minimized to the extent practicable? On this slide, these are examples of other discretionary review criteria that's already in the zoning code. Some of this is environmental reviews. Some of this is conditional use permit reviews. But this is the nature of the review, is to sort of set up the issues that you have to address. But they are vague by its nature, right? The process explores what does it mean to be compatible with the surrounding area. You have to define the surrounding area. You have to characterize what's there. And then how does that use or development, how is it compatible, or how are you mitigating significant adverse impacts? And so I guess this is all to say that the language that was popping up as of concern is language that we use elsewhere in the zoning code around discretionary reviews. But that said, the 2 things really that we highlighted to queue up for today was a question that came up at the last work session was around that first criteria around public benefit, and that there's no sort of parameters of what defines a public benefit. I think what the one thing that we talked about that we heard in our work group was that maybe we expand on that and to clarify or make sure that we're not only, public benefit is not just economic benefit, that there needs to be other non-economic things, benefits to the community that come with that, and to sort of expand this criteria to provide direction that you can't just stop at economic benefit. You got to go beyond that. But that was the sort of one element that we thought that we could sort of address that issue around what is a public benefit. But open to your thoughts and questions.
I have a question about the extent practicable language. You're going to get to that next. or were you going to address, not going to address it?
I don't think we have that queued up, but
Okay.
maybe after we get through these two, we can.
Okay, because I
about it.
do want to ask you about that. So can you give us an example of what, how you would distinguish between an economic and non-economic benefit? I mean,
Yeah.
is job creation or job preservation an economic benefit or a non?
That would be an economic benefit. And I would think, again, these transloading facilities might be like, oh, we need to add this capacity or the price of gas is going to raise by 50% or whatever. That would be an economic benefit. I think the example that I've given is that, the example we just saw of the sustainable aviation fuel having to be loaded onto a barge and barged short distance down the river from the McCall terminal to the Kinder Morgan Willbridge terminal and then offloaded and shipped to the airport, right? A community benefit would be, oh, let's allow for a transloading pipeline connection between those terminals so that we don't have that fuel going up and down the river. That to me would be a community or an environmental benefit that is beyond an economic benefit of getting the jet fuel that PDX needs.
And then just one other sort of zoning approach question. Could you articulate after the word public benefit such as, and then list a couple of other factors? Do you do that in other places in the code where you're making discretionary decisions? It sounds like a Shannon.
Yeah, well, we have, like, in this second from the bottom example, right? The broader concept is significant adverse impacts on livability, but then it goes on to say, well, what does that encompass? It encompasses noise, glare, late night operations, so we could look at sort of enumerating what that might be.
It would not be predicated on such as, however, if we want the particular benefit to be demonstrated, we would need to say it is, you demonstrate that benefit. Such as is, in the code is an example of, but not, it doesn't mean you must show that, so.
Maybe the lack of this in the proposal means you figure you couldn't do it, but it'd be nice to have something saying this is the Oregonians' benefit. Is that possible? I see that many of these examples elsewhere in the code is clearly, we're talking about our local area.
Yeah.
This one, California could be highly benefited by being able to ship stuff through our port.
Commissioners, can I make a suggestion on this? I think what we're looking for is kind of your nod as to the idea. Would you like us to explore this idea further? I think we need to go back and think about the words. I think we need to go back and also, the idea of enumerating in such a way that they're examples, because I think it would be difficult to enumerate and say you absolutely have to do all these things, but showing some examples. I think your question, Commissioner Spivak, is something we would have to kind of consult internally more and see if that's
So
viable.
my answer is
So-
yes, and. I like this approach of it expanding beyond economic, and I think that even within the economic realm, I think that we should focus on Oregon. Thanks.
So we will take that feedback and we'll go back and look at that.
Thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Thompson, and then I'll put myself in queue. Oh, okay. I agree with the general direction of this proposed amendment, but can you go back to the slide you were just on? Oh, sorry, no, the one that actually has the code. Yeah, here we go. So item C, that approval criteria, for me,
We'll get to that
oh,
right after this one.
okay.
Sorry.
And that was my question as well, so great. Any others?
Yeah.
too much to
general
talk about
concept,
all
yeah.
of it at once.
There's a lot.
It's a lot.
I'm continuously impressed with you, Tom, in terms of the technical knowledge on this project. It's really significant. I also agree with this direction, and my questions coming up are around neighborhood involvement and support from these companies, and I don't have a good sense of where this fits. But I'm thinking about, is there disaster preparedness funding that could be contributed to the local neighborhood, or something else where we could encourage public benefit in ways that are directed towards that local community, with some increased engagement or accountability or funding or support. And it's a little bit outside the box, but that's where I just have some questions and curiosity.
I certainly think that there's room for that under these criteria, for that to be part of a proposal, the terminal, especially even under criteria B, where you're addressing the public health and environmental risks. And okay, these are the emergency preparedness measures that we're taking to mitigate that risk, and that would be that sort of trade-off that you're looking for in that interaction. It becomes part of the whole package, and that would be one way of demonstrating consistency, compliance with criteria B.
Anyone else? Mr. Brandon?
In follow-up to that, like, I'm even thinking good neighbor agreements. I've seen that done. That was something that was considered with Prologis in Northeast 122nd. To go along with what Mary was saying, maybe that's a way to do that.
Okay, we'll look at that and bring back some ideas on that.
I'd like to ask a 101 question about type 3 review procedure. So that would involve public involvement, a community involvement component, correct? Who could appeal to city council? Who would have standing?
Anyone that participates in the process.
So anyone who shows up to testify could then, okay,
Yeah.
great,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's still the case that the neighborhood association can appeal for free. Anyone else has to pay. Is that correct?
I believe so. You guys don't? Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So let's move on to criteria C, which was around seismic risks, and we have the phrase minimize to the extent practicable. And there were some concerns about what that meant, and I think and this was in contrast to when we get to it and talk about the storage tank requirement of a risk category 4, and when the engineers come in 30 minutes, we can talk about that. But our understanding was transloading piping facilities, especially if you think of the sort of above ground overhead piping connections between the tanks, structurally meeting a risk category 4 standard is very difficult. And oftentimes they do alternatives with flexible piping and automatic shutoff valves. And so using the language in here that says, nope, you have to do it to risk category 4 may be too restrictive. That sets the bar so high, it's virtually impossible to meet. And so minimize to the extent practicable means you go through a process to show, well, what are the alternatives, and how you minimize the risk, and essentially, demonstrate to staff, to the hearings officer, to council that your package of seismic improvements is reasonable to minimize the risk. Based on our conversations with DEQ and with the work group, one of the things that to address this issue would be to change that language to meet the highest applicable seismic standard for transloading. So there's still a little bit of wiggle room, but we still want them to achieve as much as they can in addressing the vulnerability of the piping in the systems there.
And I like that because seismic code changes very often.
Yes.
Yeah, Commissioner Spivak and then Knowles.
So back a slide, would this be instead of the or clause? They replacing the whole or clause, or would it be this or be complying with the RMIP?
I think that's a second half of the issue that I think could follow on from sort of the DEQ discussion and sort of thinking beyond the current lifespan of the RMIP implementation. And it could be that we just get rid of everything after the or and just say, okay, you want to do this new facility, it's got to be designed to the highest applicable seismic standard. And just leave it at that, and not even bring the RMIP into the discussion on the city side. They're still going to have to go through their own process to demonstrate to DEQ that whatever this new facility is meets the DEQ standards, but that's where we could separate the city process from the DEQ process.
Knowles and then Ames.
I think that approach makes sense to me. I was concerned that there were going to be two different standards applied through this language, and that doesn't seem right. And if you're talking about transloading facilities, they're not tanks. I'm sure there are different standards. I think seeking to get the highest applicable standard applied makes sense.
All these projects need to get permitted. And I guess I don't understand why they wouldn't be required to be to the highest seismic standard.
I think, again, when our engineers show up,
Yeah.
they'll talk about what it means to be risk category 2, 3, 4, and the situations in which these types of facilities often get categorized right now as a 2 or a 3 because of the as I understand it, the immediate risk to human life, right? So and do you want the facility to continue to operate after the event? Yeah. So if you think about a hospital, we want that, or a fire station, hospital with lots of people in it.
Yeah.
We want it to, that's risk category, that often gets categorized as a risk category 4. A tank gets a 2 or a 3 because the immediate risk to human life is not as great, but the after effect of all of the material going everywhere and all that, we're through this, we're trying to elevate that. We're trying to take control of that. Hey, we are defining what is the risk to human life and human health, and we're saying it's more important than say what might otherwise, like, oh, well, no one lives immediately around here, there's no risk. It can go lower.
Okay.
I'm curious, as we're talking about risk category, I understand, is it 3 that is like, it needs to be containable, and 4 is operable after a major, for example, a subduction event. But my understanding also, like, to what extent is that fuel need to be online and available in the direct aftermath of, for example, a subduction event in order to implement disaster recovery?
Getting a little bit beyond my
Sorry.
expertise, but I think that is the concept, right? Is that we're recognizing we're going to need fuel for emergency response after the event, and so making sure that these facilities survive and have some functionality afterwards, or can quickly be brought up to function, is the idea of requiring the higher standard.
I think our saviors are, have joined us. You have been much anticipated, friends. Yeah, Commissioner
Yeah,
Alvarado.
I mean, if we can pause there and
Yeah,
have
can we get,
Amit and Jason.
yeah, Commissioner Alvarado, and then let's invite our,
Just when speaking about the standards, is that a building code standard, and is that specific to these type of facilities? Are those outlined, or who sets that standard?
It's a great transition to the next phase. So why don't we go there?
nice job, Commissioner Alvarado.
Amit, Jason, you want to come up?
We didn't even allow you to get the seats warm. Thank you for being here, friends.
I got it all queued up from what you sent me. So just tell me when you want to advance. And I think turn on your mics there. Oh. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Amit Kumar. I am the supervising structural engineer at Portland Permitting and Development. And I have with me Kevin Wells. He is a geotechnical engineer at PP&D. So I've been asked to provide some background about seismic performance requirements or challenges associated with designing to risk category 4 as they relate to tanks and facilities at the CEI hub. So what I'll do is maybe just have a brief background on what the different risk categories are in the building code, and then we'll touch on the geotechnical and structural issues and to get a sense of the solutions available to address these issues. And then we'll take a look at one of the facilities at the airport to see how some of those challenges were addressed, and then wrap it up with some additional considerations that may be needed at the facilities at the CI hub. Okay. So the building code categorizes structures into risk categories that range from risk category 1 to 4. Risk category 1 being the highest, the lowest, and risk category 4 being the highest based on risks to human life and welfare in the event of damage or failure to these facilities. As far as seismic design goes at a given site, the structures are designed to the same expected seismic hazard or earthquake ground motions that may be expected at the site, regardless of what the risk category is. But what differs between the different risk categories is the expected structural performance of these structures. The next slide. So we'll talk about risk category 2 first, because they represent the majority of the built environment that we have. What we expect for structures that are designed to this risk category is they're expected to experience very little damage under relatively frequent or more moderate earthquakes. They are stable and have significant reserve capacity. However, under the more severe and infrequent earthquakes, we can expect significantly larger damage and potential economic loss. Structures are standing, but they're barely, and they're not safe to occupy. So this is what we call as a collapse prevention standard that we design these risk category 2 structures for. And then on the other end of the scale is risk category 4, where buildings that are called as essential facilities or facilities that process or store or handle hazardous material in sufficient quantities, which they'll pose a substantial risk to the community if they are released. So under this risk category, structures are designed to the standard are intended to allow for immediate occupancy following a relatively frequent or moderate earthquakes. Under the more severe or infrequent earthquakes, the structure is expected to remain stable and have some reserve capacity against collapse. It may suffer some damage, but we can expect them to be able to be functional in a shorter period of time frame. And then we have, in between the risk categories 2 and 4, we have a risk category 3, which is halfway between the 2 and 3, the performance level that you can expect. So at the CEI hub, the tanks that are there, they generally would end up being in this risk category 3 structures based on the amount of the quantities of hazardous materials in them. But they could be classified according to the building code as risk category 2 if there can be demonstrated by a hazard assessment that the release of the toxic or highly toxic material is not sufficient to pose a threat to the public. And generally, Portland Fire advises PP&D regarding the nature and quantities of the material stored use to determine the risk category. So just to compare and contrast what it means to design to risk category 3 versus risk category 4. So risk category 3 structures are designed for about 25% higher seismic forces than what we would typically for risk category 2. And risk category 4 is designed for 50% more seismic forces than they are designed for risk category 2. Structures for risk category 3, they require deep foundations, and we'll talk a little bit more what we mean by deep foundations. If the lateral spread exceeds 12 inches, it's 18 inches for risk category 2, but for risk category 4, if you exceed the lateral spread by 4 inches compared to 12 in risk category 3, then you're required to design for deep foundations there. Similarly, for liquefaction or differential settlement that you get, if you exceed 12 inches over, say, a 100-foot diameter, then you require deep foundation if you're in risk category 3. But then that is limited to only 2.5 inches. So you can imagine the tank sitting on there. The tilt that you might get based on the differential settlement is far less when you design it for a risk category 4 versus risk category 3. And as the expected performance goes, the tanks that are designed to risk category 3 are expected to survive earthquakes without rupture, but they may not be repairable to be in service. Whereas risk category 4 tanks are expected to be in service soon after a severe earthquake. They may then need some minor repairs in there. So you can conceive from the previous slide, the structural requirements going from structural risk category 2 to 4 escalate quite dramatically. With that said, it's sort of easier to accommodate the structural design requirements, but it's more challenging to address issues associated with geotechnical hazards. The structural design can accommodate the 25% or 50% higher design forces by providing maybe a little bit more concrete or steel or some additional anchorage to the foundations. But the geotechnical issues of lateral spread and differential settlement is another matter altogether. So Kevin, if you would want to just talk a little bit about the geotechnical hazards and how to address these issues.
Yeah, as Amit said, mitigating geotechnical hazards can be more challenging to mitigate than meeting the structural design requirements. And there's really two key hazards that we're talking about here. One is liquefaction, and the other one is lateral spread. And just as a refresher, liquefaction can occur in loose, low to non-plastic sanded silt below groundwater when subject to strong ground shaking. This can result in significant soil strength loss, and the soil begins to transform and behave as a viscous fluid. As you can imagine, structure supported over this viscous fluid can perform poorly unless appropriately mitigated. The key impacts of these hazards is permanent ground deformation. And the ground deformation we're talking about is both vertical and lateral. Vertical deformations are associated with reconsolidation of the liquefied strata following ground shaking. We typically, as geotechnical engineers, measure that in inches, perhaps a few feet. Lateral spreading is another matter where lateral spreading can occur or be initiated by liquefaction and occurs near sloping ground or water bodies. And lateral spreading is typically measured in terms of feet. Geotechnical hazards are, especially for ground improvement, typically require some form of ground improvement. We move on to the next. Here's a slide there shows a great example of lateral spreading. And for lateral spreading, the non-liquefied crust will break apart into discrete blocks, and those blocks will begin to displace from one another and lurch and migrate towards the river's edge. A key point to remember with lateral spreading is that the severity of lateral spreading becomes more severe the closer you are to the water body or top of slope. In the next slide, I believe, is a good example of existing infrastructure that underwent either partial bearing failure or differential settlements due to vertical consolidation of the soil mass following liquefaction. And this is a good example of that there. So what are the methods to mitigate this? Well, mitigation is typically put together along 3 tracks with increasing rigor and difficulty. First one is you can support structures on gridded shallow foundations or mat foundations. The second option is to put a structure on deep foundations to where we take the vertical loads of the structure and support those on a more stable soil mass below the liquefied soil. And the third option is ground improvement, where we improve the stability of the ground itself. Ground improvement can include multiple different options for this. Some of the ones that we see here locally are deep soil mixing, it's used quite a bit, stone columns, jet grouting is another option. But in the Portland area, we tend to see a lot of deep soil mix columns simply because deep soil mix columns have an advantage. They have quite a bit of more reach than maybe stone columns. Ground improvement can be placed below structures or outside of structure footprints. Quite often where we have lateral spreading, we can arrange ground improvement as a soil buttress, which is a block of soil, improved soil below grade, that acts to mitigate the displacements associated with lateral spreading. Or mitigation may include both ground improvement below a structure or as a buttress, or may include combinations of deep foundations and ground improvement and shallow foundations. Let's see here. Unlike buildings, I think with the CEI hub, one thing to keep in mind is that much of the infrastructure and structures in general are interconnected with piping. And the piping also has to meet those displacement requirements. And that's a challenge if you're attaching existing structures to new structures. And so you have to accommodate those relative displacements. And that can be mitigated with flexible piping or seismic loops to accommodate those displacements. And so here we have a prime example of deep soil mixing. A key takeaway here is that deep soil mixing and stone columns or any ground improvement works best in an open arena where it's not, you have the space to do it, you have the real estate to do that. It's very difficult to perform where there's a lot of existing infrastructure. If we go over to the next slide, another key takeaway from ground improvement is that it is invasive. It's very effective, but it's also very invasive.
So we just want to take an example of a recent project that was subjected to this lateral displacement and liquefaction and what was done there to mitigate some of those hazards. So this is a fuel facility at the airport. And at this, we had like 3 new storage tanks that were placed for storing jet fuel. Each having about 2.6 million gallons being stored in there. This is located at the northwest corner of the airport there, and it was required based on the contents there to be designed to risk category 3, but they voluntarily decided to design these facilities to risk category 4 as a risk category 4 structures. One of the key things to remember as we look at things done in the next few slides, is that this facility is about 1,500 feet from the riverbank in here. So that becomes interesting as we compare this site to the CEI hub. Next slide in there. So this just gives you an overall view of the tanks, a plan view of the tanks that are there. So these tanks were supported on a mat foundation and has got piles under the tank in there. And then like Kevin was just mentioning, because of the big lateral spread that is there, we had to design the piping system to accommodate that lateral movement that is in there. And then there's a fire suppression equipment that is there, and piping and facilities. That was required to be designed for risk category 4. And we'll see what impact that has on the thing. So if you look at the next slide, so this is just an example of a plan view of a tank and the foundation under it. And all the circles, little small dots that you see under the tank are the piles. There were 138 piles under each of those tanks that was needed in there. Next slide. And this is just a cross section across there. So the tanks are supported on a mat foundation, which is about 2 foot 9 inches thick. And these piles that I just mentioned, about 138 piles per foundation, extended about 140 feet into the ground. And this is, again, just a little plan view of all the piping that goes on to support the transfer of the material from one tank to another tank and then to the storage facility. This one, if you had to be, and also supporting the fire piping for transporting the foam for firefighting. And this one had to be, again, supported on grade beams that are then supported on piles. If you look at to the right side, there is a little 3D image of the piles. Typically, if it was a risk category 2 structure, we wouldn't have it to support on the piles. Because of the differential settlement that you get, the pipes cannot accommodate that movement without rupture. So we had to support them on pile foundations. So that's an extra expense that is there. Next slide. Or actually, if you could just go back. I don't know, it's not very clear or easily seen on this slide, but again, as I had mentioned, because of the lateral movement, since it's connected to different structures in there, because each structure moves differentially, we have to accommodate the movement of the pipes, and they have to provide like seismic loops to accommodate the movement for the pipes in here. Slide. And this is a facility there for offloading facility. And again, this is just a plan view of the foundations that are there. Typically on a risk category 2 structure, you will see isolated foundations under each of the columns. But here, because it's a risk category 2 and 3, all these isolated foundations had to be tied together with a grid of concrete beams, which are called grade beams in here. Otherwise, typically for risk category 2, you wouldn't have had to do that in there. So these are some of the things that you have to do to mitigate these hazards associated with risk category 3 and 4 structures. So at the CEI hub, though, if you can, as you all know, the facilities that are there are much closer to the riverbank, in the order of about 50 feet. The one that we looked at the airport, those facilities were about 1,500 feet away and still had those issues. So you can imagine being closer to the bank, these are much more exaggerated. The hazards for the lateral spread and liquefaction are much more. And in some cases here, you get what is called as a flow failure, where the soil just moves into the river, and there's no support for the structures there. So here, we can expect lateral spread to be in the order of magnitude of about 4 feet, whereas at the airport facility, we had a lateral spread of about 12 inches at the most. So again, so at the CEI hub, again, a partial solution is what we did at the airport, where we did mitigation through use of concrete mat foundations and piling. But those by themselves will not be adequate, most likely, and would need some additional ground improvement or some sort of a combination of both those things to help mitigate these issues in there. In addition, there are issues with piers and wharfs at the CEI hub. These are significantly more challenging to mitigate because they're close to the water, and you get a lot of, they're prone to flow failure. They will require some sort of, may require in water or top of bank ground improvements, and they are now in environmental zones requiring a greenway and river review. They may be subject to floodplain development requirements, and in-water work would require a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of State Lands, and they have their own requirements in there. So these are some of the challenges that you'll see at this EI hub with all the, and like I said earlier, it was most of the issues are related to ground improvements and the foundations, the structures could be easily designed to accommodate for the earthquake, but it's the ground improvements that are most significant. So I think that's what we have for you. If you're welcome, and be open for any questions.
And just for reference, we added this map that is from a Water Bureau study in 2016 that gives you a sense of what Amit was saying about the level of expected lateral spread, with the pink being the largest amount, up to 10 feet of lateral spread there right along the river, and then going down 5 to 10 feet in the gold, even 1 to 5 feet as you get back from the river. There still is a significant risk of that lateral spread in this area.
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner Spivak.
Thank you. This is great. 2 questions. One, in the CEI hub, one of your early slides showed that there was a, if it's a level 3 versus level 4, how much lateral shift or differential settlement would trigger the deep foundation requirement. Am I hearing correctly that in the CEI hub, probably either one would trigger the deep foundation?
Probably yes. Okay. But I think one thing we can think about is, like, for example, if you do a ground improvement, you could do an improvement so that, you could lower the lateral spread to 12 inches, and then you can just use shallow foundations. Mm-hmm. But you have to do enough ground improvements to reduce it to 4 inches before you need deep foundations in risk category 4.
Okay. So you can do ground preparation to try and get yourself into a smaller foundation.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other question is, if we were just speaking previously about where we might say you have to be the highest level of seismic, which would be level 4, if instead of that we relied on the state's requirements, is the state requiring a 3 or a 4? Or if someone just has a new tank with a, whatever that acronym is, what is that? RMIP process, does the state have its own requirement for what level, or could they do a level 2 or level 3 potentially if they just follow the state's process?
So you're talking about the DEQs?
Yes, sorry,
yes.
Yeah, the DEQ.
So I think the DEQ requirements are basically to reduce the spill, the amount of spill. Mm-hmm. So they have to design it so that you don't exceed that amount of uncontained spill. And what they say is if you design to risk category 4, that standard is met. So you could possibly design the tanks for risk category 2 as long as they can demonstrate that it doesn't exceed the spill.
Gotcha. So if you designed to category 4, check the box, you did it.
Correct.
But you could also check the box if you designed to 2 or 3, but you'd have to show, in addition to the structural, that you've got some containment. Maybe this was shared before, but that helps me understand.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner Brandon.
And just to clarify, so it's super clear, because there are hazardous materials in this tank, it typically is going to be category 4.
No, these are typically going to be category 3 because they're not explosive materials that are there. So again, typically most of the tanks would end up being risk category 3 They could be downgraded to 2 if they can show that it doesn't exceed certain amounts and doesn't impact the community.
I mean, I know you look at those as each individual tank, but say liquefaction and the big one happens, they're all going to liquefy at the same time, so then that becomes a flammable risk.
It does, but it typically risk category 4 would require these to be explosive or toxic in enough quantities. So I don't believe that would go into risk category 4. But again, that's something that a fire bureau helps us determine whether that becomes a risk category, which risk category they would fall in.
So right now, they're not doing any hazard index for the mixing of the chemicals that are within each of the tanks to say.
I mean, they would look at each individual tank and say, that tank, yeah.
But you understand how that doesn't make sense?
Yeah.
If we have an earthquake, why aren't we looking at them for when they mix?
Yeah, well, that's the building code, right? So the building code tells you that, you have to show that this would, each one it tells you how much quantities they have to consider. And again, like I said, I mean, I'm not an expert in that area there is to say, okay, what quantities are required before they go from this risk category to that category.
Thompson and then Ames.
Okay, can we go back to the last slide, Tom, please? And thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. So the heavy black outlines, those are CEI operator sites, right? So the numbers that I was hearing previously for lateral spread were still pretty terrifying in the 4 to 10 feet range, but this is showing something significantly higher than that, 10 feet up to 88 or 83 feet lateral spread for these sites closest to the river.
Yeah, so the extent of lateral spread will depend on proximity, soil conditions, and also the level of detail in the study. So sometimes with this slide here is based off of much more simplistic evaluation of ground conditions, and so it's a ballpark estimate. From what I've seen from geotechnical reports in the area for improvements in this site, lateral deformations will vary based on proximity to the river, as we stated. And yeah, you may have some areas that do experience flow failure. Tend to see those anywhere from depending on the site, thinking of a couple of sites in particular, either anything beyond the top of slope to maybe 25 feet back behind the top of slope. Ground displacements behind that could be quite extensive, depending on where you're at, and they could exceed that 4 feet or 6 feet. One of the things that we have a problem with as geotechnical engineers, quite honestly, is predicting lateral spread. And so it takes quite a big rigor to evaluate the site conditions, and that'll be revealed through a site-specific geotechnical study, which they take soil samples in the field and they evaluate the potential for liquefaction. And out of that will come a much better and more refined estimate of lateral spreading. But lateral spreading estimates from a geotechnical engineer are usually good for plus or minus 50% from the stated estimate.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the feasibility of designing risk category 4 structures in many of these zones per the DEQ program or what we're talking about with the proposed draft here. I mean, these are sites that are all they're currently operational. There's a bunch of stuff looking. I haven't been there. I kind of wish we had done. I'm not going to ask that of you, but they're packed full of stuff, and there's probably a presumption of wanting to remain operable while this RMIP work is done with DEQ and with the. And I don't understand how with these site constraints one does the deep soil mixing. And I'm so glad you shared some of those images because this is the river edge and it's taking concrete and it's just I mean, there's no stability there. And so I think that's another thing that we haven't really talked about as a commission is just like the impact of doing that on the river edge. Is it even possible to do this sort of work within the site boundaries with all of the stuff that currently exists on the site?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But yes, so we have had permits, and we're actually reviewing a permit now for the port in which they are installing ground improvement buttresses to mitigate for lateral spreading. And they're going to do this with deep soil mixing, as you saw on the slide. Of course, on those sites, the ones that we've seen ground improvement, is there haven't been this extent of existing infrastructure and underground obstructions as we would probably see in the DEI hub.
Okay, all right. This feels like really minor with respect to the first question, but we have been talking about the transloading infrastructure and the standard that should be required because as Tom has described it, the tank design to risk category 4 is a little bit easier and more clearly defined, and that's not the case with the transloading and understanding flexible piping and all of that. The proposed language is still something to the effect of the highest seismic standard should be applied to transloading. But is there a standard, and what is it, and how is that going to be reviewed? And is that does that feel achievable from a review standpoint?
Yeah, so the building code that we enforce does not have a standard for these facilities like piers and wharves that are not accessible to the public. There is a what we call as the ASCE 61 standard for piers and wharves that is for design of new piers and wharves that can be used, but again, is not something that is in the building code, or at least not enforced by the building code in there. So yes, it's a big challenge. And very frankly, right now, as far as like piping and those kind of facilities go, one of the things that we do is to design, make sure that, because it becomes pretty expensive to mitigate for same lateral spread and differential settlement when it goes to piping supports. So we do allow, because they are risk category 3 structures, to allow for these piping to fail safely, meaning that if the pipes fail, they don't release the quantity of spill that is there is contained. It's just limited to what's there in the pipes themselves. So that's one standard we use to evaluate piping at this point for these risk category 3 structures. But like you saw in one of the slides where we had to design these for risk category 4 for the fire suppression systems that are there, they had to be placed on piles. And so that does become an extra, pretty expensive to do. But transloading facilities by the riverbank, they are a challenge. Like I said, you probably have to do some work in the water there. Then that then generates a lot of other issues with the Army Corps of Engineers and DSL and all those kind of facilities. But yes, given the cost, almost anything can be done.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I guess the takeaway that I'm hearing is that even if everything went perfectly to plan and all of the operators did their RMIPs and made all the upgrades and somehow were able to design everything to risk category 4 or the highest possible for the transloading infrastructure, we shouldn't be under any illusions that if there's a subduction zone earthquake that it's not reasonable to expect that all of these fuel materials will be contained.
I think that's the expectations. If you design for that, is to make sure that you don't get an uncontrolled spill or it doesn't exceed the amount of spill to be a hazard. And so that's the goal. And we expect if they're done to that standard, then yes, you would expect that it would meet that standard.
Okay, but the feasibility is sort of a separate.
Yeah, that's a separate thing, yeah.
Ames and then Knowles?
You might not know the answer to this, but percentage-wise, number-wise, of the tanks that are there, how many have some form of ground improvement? Is it 0? I mean, is it,
A handful.
okay,
And they would just be new tanks.
Right.
Built to current code. So.
okay, thanks.
I mean, I think the tanks that were built after 2010
Yeah.
would be something that we would have checked to make sure they meet the standards, so that the liquefaction hazards and lateral spreads are addressed. But again, these are for new tanks built after that.
Knowles and then Spivak? Knowles. Commissioner Knowles?
Do you have a way to give us some sort of estimate, not necessarily in dollars, but in proportion about the cost to the owner of doing a type 3 or whatever you call it, the risk category 3 versus risk category 4 improvement?
No. I think that question would be better answered by some contractors that are there. I do not have a very good answer for you on that one.
Well, let me try this. Of the projects you've seen, is there a reason why an owner would not want to do a risk category 4 improvement? Is it only the cost? The port decided to do it voluntarily.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely it's the cost, for sure. And then again, I think what the goal is, as far as, whether they want to be up and running as soon as after the earthquake happens, or, their goal is just to make sure that the community is not impacted by whatever happens as far as the release goes. So, I think it's a lot of it ends up being the cost involved.
Okay, and then final question, I want to go back to what Commissioner Thompson was just asking about. So, a tank facility that is built to a category 4 risk level, is there a way to describe its likelihood of, despite all that improvement, having a spill event in the event of a major seismic event? Is there a percentage? Because it's not 100% certain, but is it a possibility that even with a category risk 4 improvement?
Yeah, as far as tanks go,
Chance?
as far as tanks go, they would be expected to be, like I said, if you get a moderate earthquake, they should not have any issues with any failures in there. The tanks are supposed to be operational right after an event. It's when you get these severe earthquakes, you might get some damage. You might get some spill, but again, you're not expected that this spill would be enough to be a hazard to the community.
It sounds like it's not a perfect science.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you don't know what kind of earthquake you'll get next time you have, and what kind of structures, is able to handle that. So we are just making a lot of assumptions, a lot of guesses on what type of earthquakes you'll get.
Okay,
and we design to that.
Thanks. We may have already covered this, but I'm looking at, like, this amendment is related to 030, which is, sorry, 060. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm seeing if you're doing a fuel storage tank capacity transfer review, have we also talked about changing that language with regard to transloading facilities?
Yeah, that'll be the next section that we get to today.
Okay, thanks. And on the map, the big map you did, which is maybe jumping to that section, there's obviously no 250-foot line, but that's the line that shows up in our code. It seems like, yeah, there we go. Based on a city block being about 200 feet, it looks like that 250-foot setback from the river would go right through a lot of that pink area. Is that, like, there's a lot of the, how am I saying this? Is it correct that a lot of the parts of the CEI hub that could have lateral spread of over 10 feet is greater than 250 feet?
I don't know, but we can overlay.
Just put the 250 on there. I mean, I'm not sure what it does, but like, I originally thought, oh, 250 feet's great. Not great, but it's a good distance. But now I'm seeing there's probably plenty of parcels where you're 250 feet away and you still could have 10-foot lateral displacement. But understandably, we also want people to have a chance to replace their old tanks. So I can understand there's a balance there.
Well, and it's not just about replacement, it's this transfer process, right? That special circumstance, you're moving capacity from one terminal to another. We're wanting to make sure as part of that move, you're moving it away from the river, not just, staying
Yeah.
close to the river.
Okay. Yeah, the away from is not feeling as far away as I thought.
Right.
Others? Everyone's experiencing existential dread from 1 to 10.
Just a note on this map, and it speaks to what Kevin was getting at, is that this was based on a Portland Water Bureau risk assessment done in 2016. And I think one of the issues with the DEQ seismic vulnerability assessments that each terminal is doing right now is the sort of detailed information that Kevin was talking about. And so we would expect more detailed information about what the actual lateral spread risk is. And I think that's part of the delay, is that DEQ has gone back and asked for more information, more modeling work that the companies are currently doing. So I would expect that we would begin to see sort of these updated, revised vulnerability assessments that provide a greater level of detail than what we see on this map. Oh, is that, okay. So this is what.
Can we go back to that map just for one second? I feel it should be, has there been a minute-by-minute modeling of what a subduction event, particularly in this area, might look like?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No, but people have imagined what the scenarios would be.
Yeah.
But broadly across the entire Portland Basin, you wouldn't normally see that from a geotechnical report.
Okay.
The geotechnical report's going to mainly assess the, they'll be spending a lot of their time evaluating the triggering mechanism of liquefaction, and then if liquefaction does occur, they'll spend quite a bit of their rigor estimating what the vertical and lateral displacements are, and that'll vary with the site.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe Kyle, can you come up and explain this map, which is based on early first draft SVAs?
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioners. Kyle Jenkins for the record. So this was taken from a PSU report done by some PSU engineers based on, I believe, the initially submitted seismic vulnerability assessments in 2024. So it's in centimeters, unfortunately, but it shows the same information at a facility level.
There were several studies too with like Multnomah County and the Bureau of Emergency Management in 2020 that did kind of summarize the impacts of this as well. Maybe not to the geotechnical level, but.
Yeah, the risk assessment that the city, PBEM and the county did did more of a blanket assumption, what would happen, I believe it was a 90% failure of the tanks and all of that material going and getting to the river and clean up and to more assess worst-case scenario of damages and cleanup costs. I don't believe there was a whole lot in terms of beyond that. We're just going to assume 90% failure that goes into this level of detail around, well, this site is on a little more stable ground than that site. So I
And I
don't think
think
they discounted for this type of variation in risk.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of engineers, we design for redundancy for a worst-case scenario, whatever is cost-effective to do so. And so I think that's what, now I'm looking at, we were saying that last code to the risk rating that is the most, if you go back. But now I really think category 4 is the best, because if that's what we can do, we should do that. So I want to make sure that whatever we're requiring is saying to that level, just because when these chemicals mix, they will create a different environment and be amplified to that other category. Because when this earthquake happens, it's not just going to be one tank. That's part of the reason why SB, I can never remember the number, the bill that created DEQ's program, why it happened is because those emergency management plans were for one individual tank failing. But we know it's not just going to be one, it's going to be a cumulative impact intersecting a lot of different things. Fate and transport of flaming chemicals, the liquefaction zone, the damaged structures, the people in the area who are going to have environmental and air hazard risks. And so we have to design for a more significant situation. I think we do that in most engineering designs too.
The wharves and piers are considered transloading infrastructure, correct?
Yeah.
So the RMIP process is going to require that they also be updated to risk category 4 or some appropriate equivalent for those sorts of structures.
That's my understanding, that they're part of the terminal and the facilities, and that they're subject to the DEQ program requirements to minimize the spill coming off of those facilities.
Is that feasible to do with all of these other overlaying requirements that you touched on? E-zones?
It's going to be complicated.
Okay.
But I think that's where the thing, like automatic shutoff valves are to, fail safely, right? That you're only spilling what's in the pipe or happens to be in the pipe at the time of the event, not is the pipe operational afterwards. I think for a lot of those more challenging pieces of the system, that they would go more to that, minimize the amount of material that gets spilled. Right? Can move to the transfer review, or do you want to go back and talk about the transloading review a little bit more? Good, if you want.
I think we can move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to start, this is the current review criteria. Again, we're in a situation where maybe because of the cost of improvement, where a terminal has said, well, we're not going to do the improvements, we're going to shut down. And whoever, another terminal sees a market opportunity, sees a need for additional capacity to continue to serve the market, and says, well, we'll transfer some of that capacity to our terminal. So under what conditions would we allow that transfer? Under normal cases, right, you're not going to be able to expand your capacity. And so we set up a series of criteria that, you know, you're transferring that capacity between two bulk fuel terminals. Then the next is that, you know, you need to show that there's a continued need for that capacity. So again, we're looking at those fuel demand curves and where we're at, and you know, what is the need for that capacity? Why do we need to still keep it operational and active somewhere in the hub to serve that need? And that the receiving site doesn't have excess capacity that they could use to meet that need. So, you know, if we had a terminal that for some reason, you know, already was, you know, based on running at 50% capacity anyway, we're not going to let you add more capacity to that. Just ramp up your own capacity. You can't stockpile that capacity. So first, use what you have. Show us that you need more to satisfy that continued need. So that's what criteria B is getting at. Then criteria C is, you know, just showing that, you know, that it was in service. We're talking about in-service tank capacity, and that we want to make sure that after you've transferred that capacity, you're going to demolish that tank. We don't want the zombie tanks out there that may for some reason come back to life. And then in criteria D, we want to make sure that the receiving site meets risk category 4 or is consistent with their approved risk mitigation plan. And there we're assuming that any change to a terminal's plan they would need to amend their risk mitigation plan to show those new improvements. And so we're again, it's sort of set up the way the DEQ program is, which is there's a safe harbor designed to risk category 4, or go through the DEQ amendment process to show how this new tank would meet the DEQ's requirements. Then we go further, right? We have the 250-foot setback requirement in criterion E. Criterion F is this location on the receiving site is safer than the sending site. That gets in these lateral spread risk maps that we were just looking at. Our thought is that you want to clearly demonstrate that we're getting a net safety benefit out of this transfer. Criterion G is this sort of transfer tax, right? We want another 20% reduction for the privilege of moving that capacity to the new site. So if I'm taking 100 gallons from a sending site, the receiving site only gets 80 gallons of capacity. You know, so there's a reduced risk for the privilege of going through doing this transfer. And then H gets at the transloading facilities associated with this new tank, and brings in that language. The current language is minimized to the extent practicable, and we could mirror or have parallel construction between the transloading language we were talking about, the highest applicable seismic standard, and we could replicate that here. I think what we've heard is sort of from the previous discussion, the H, which I just talked about, the highest applicable seismic standard, that with criterion F, what what we sort of are proposing or for your consideration is that this F as a safety standard, we split into two different criterion. One being focused on seismic safety. That's clearly, that's the tell us about the lateral spread and the risks and make sure it's the seismic risks are lower on the receiving site. And then to bring in yet another criterion that address the fire risks. And gets at sort of what are your fire prevention mitigation measures? What is the risk from wildfire? And to have an explicit criterion that addresses that issue.
I have a few questions. What is I see the current closest, what is the current closest setback of some of the tanks? According to E, it said at
They
least
are-
250. Are there others that are,
Oh, they're right.
they're right there?
As Amit said, they're especially on, the northern part up towards Linton, they're right there on the river, even down to the south, the McCall terminal. They're right there.
Okay.
They're
So this
50
is
feet.
a way to incrementally
Yeah.
try to move forward.
Yeah, and we'll bring back a map that has that line on it.
And does the dismantling, Gesundheit,
Yeah, go ahead.
and does the dismantling of the old tank include the foundation, like the deep soil mixing, the steel? Might
We
be
could
very
we could
elementary question.
Speak to that. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, generally, we were thinking, I don't know how far the demolition permit would go, but we could clarify that in the code.
Thank you. Question? Yes, Vivek.
On item B on the list, this won't be a big surprise, I think, where it says a current fuel demand analysis shows there is a continued need in the CEI hub overall for storage tank capacity being transferred. I wonder if we could say a current fuel demand analysis knows that Oregon needs more fuel capacity, as opposed to responding to other markets to justify the transfer.
Awesome.
That's an interesting concept. The question I would have is, I assume that these facilities serve Southwest Washington as well. So
It could be regional, something like that.
maybe a regional definition of some kind. You're trying to get at,
If they are being
you don't
used,
want to
yeah.
send it to like California or China or.
Yeah, it's our safety impacts. I'm trying to, and all the modeling for parametrics shows Oregon's consumption. I think it's Oregon for parametrics, right? So I'm trying to align the benefit trade-off to look at serving our market rather than serving another market.
Commissioner Thompson.
We, I think, discussed this on the transloading. I'm wondering about it here as well, but adding or considering a requirement that the RMIP be in place before that becomes possible. And
So having an improved RMIP as a qualifier before you could do any sort of.
yes,
The the receiving site has to have an improved RMIP.
yeah, or if you want to do the transloading facilities expansion review, that you would also have that in place to try to further align with that program.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on that?
As part of the, I'm going to put myself in queue. For C, as part of the review, is there a timeline for demolition? Like, how long after transfer does a tank demolition?
I think
have to
that,
occur.
I forget exactly the timeline, but that was one of those where in a previous work session, we got into the questions around performance bonds and that the terminal would have to post a bond to make sure it happened, right? So there would be a financial incentive
Great.
for them to get it done if they wanted their bond back.
Satisfied. Thank you. Questions? Thank you.
I'm also still wondering about dropping the RMIP reference in the last, if you go back one slide, in H. I mean, I guess you could keep it in, but if they're not going to be doing ongoing auditing, and if we want this to be long-term code language, then the only avenue that would be available is
The highest
the highest, yeah, so,
highest applicable standard.
yeah, so is it
Yeah.
even necessary?
Right.
And that's still highest applicable seismic standard based on what we heard from building permit engineers. Sounds like it could still just be 3, right? Risk category 3?
Yeah, I think it could be.
Yeah.
And/or meeting the fail safely, minimize spill. I think that's what's implied by the risk category 3.
Yeah. I don't like
As
3.
opposed to the risk category leaning more towards the functional standard.
To get clarity, I thought I heard that highest available would be 4 because that's the highest number on the list.
It says highest well, it is the highest on the list. I think it needs to be more clear, that's all. Just because when they were talking about it, the highest applicable was 3 for these tanks. And that people were voluntarily doing 4. So it just needs to be really clear so that when it comes to the permit engineers, that they don't give it 3. I'm very concerned about the mixing of hazardous chemicals.
Yeah.
Does it seem like we're on the right track here?
Good to
This?
move. Thank you,
Okay.
Tom. Appreciate it.
Okay, so they dropped in a map here that has that 250-foot top of bank setback you see in the red cross hatching. And this is, so these 3 large tanks on the river, that's the McCall terminal. And then across Front Avenue is the Zenith facility, and then we get into Chevron and Kinder Morgan, Willbridge area. So you can see 250 feet, it approaches Front Avenue in this section here. And you can see the McCall tanks are right there within that. And this is the Kinder Morgan Linton facility. Shows like, probably what is that? Half of it is in that 250-foot setback area.
So where does the pipe come in? Is it this facility?
Oh, no, the Olympic pipeline and the pipeline to the PDX all come into this facility up here in the northwest corner in blue. These 2 sort of blue squares, and then this one across Front Avenue. That's all what's called the Kinder Morgan Willbridge facility.
Okay. But several of the facilities also are capable of receiving barge
Yes.
transfers.
Yeah. think you see here in red is the Chevron facility, and that's called the
Right.
Chevron dock coming out from it. And then McCall has a dock that they can use as well.
So a 250-foot setback applied to some of these sites basically renders them not usable in the future.
Well, this is only applies to when you're transferring a tank to another facility. So if, say, for example,
Replacement tank has to be 250 foot.
no. This is only under a transfer situation where, say, one terminal decides they're shutting down, we still need capacity. And say, for example, McCall said, oh, we've got room on our site. We want to transfer that capacity. We'll go through this process. That they could not locate that tank, that transfer tank, in the Red Hatch area. It would have to be farther away from the river. In sort of the replacement tank situation, say, at the New Star facility or the Kinder Morgan, they can replace those tanks at the same site, provided they meet all of those standards. And given the higher lateral spread risk right on the river, it's going to be very expensive. But they could choose to do that under our standards. Don't say, oh, replacement tanks have to be moved away from the river. Shall we move on to jet fuel? Okay. So we heard a lot of testimony from the port about the PDX jet fuel needs and their forecasting that they have done as part of their current update to their airport master plan. We previous work session had provided a supplemental memo that really incorporated the airport master plan fuel projections into the parametrics modeling to look at what does that do to the sort of to the overall need. I think we got additional testimony from the port sort of focusing in on it's not just the overall capacity of the CI hub as a whole, but it is, specific to the Kinder Morgan Willbridge facility, which is the end of the pipe to the airport, and that it could be the bottleneck in the future, and sort of ensuring that there is enough capacity there or accessible to that facility to meet those future needs, and looking at that's on the order of 96 million gallons of annual demand in the year 2035, and we've been pegging everything off of 2035 because of the parametrics modeling, especially the delayed progress scenario, that post 2035 we begin to see gains or reduced demand for liquid fuel. We finally gain enough momentum that fuel demand curve starts to bend. EV take up catches up. We have reduced demand for gasoline. It creates more slack capacity in the system after 2035 that could be repurposed to meet the jet fuel demand. But between now and 2035, we expect those fuel demand curves to be flat and not free up that capacity that could be converted. So a couple of things that we could do to address that specific to jet fuel is we could just allow a limited amount of expansion for jet fuel storage. Each terminal can expand by 5 to 10%. It has to be used for jet fuel. The other is to require those expansions to go through some sort of discretionary review criteria, and that we show that there's a need, show that it is in a safe place, so that you've mitigated all of the impacts, and so we could come up with a set of review criteria as part of that. Just for reference, to put the 5 to 10% increase in context, so 96 million gallons of additional fuel using the same 1 month turnover rate that is used in the parametrics modeling. That is equivalent to about 8 million gallons of storage capacity. And so at Kinder Morgan Willbridge, a 5 to 10% increase is in the 3 to 6 million zone. CI Hub as a total has about 370 million gallons of capacity. And so kind of the ultimate risk of allowing this expansion would be on the order of 18 to 37 million gallons of additional jet fuel capacity. And so that would be there for sort of any terminal that wants to get into the jet fuel business and help meet that demand. Currently, there are only 3 terminals that have jet fuel tanks and that are part of that system, if you will, both for PDX and for the state and the rest of the region. So those are some options and obviously we could do nothing and just say no expansions and have the terminals manage that flow. I think in the previous work session we talked about negotiating between terminals and connections, and the transloading review process would be a way of adding those connections needed to link up multiple terminals to help serve that jet fuel need.
Commissioner Knowles.
I've got 2 questions. The first is, we've referred really just to the Port of Portland, but aviation fuel is distributed from these facilities, I assume, all over the state?
Yes. The PDX accounts for about 75% of the jet fuel demand in Oregon. The 96 million gallon is sort of the CI Hub share of meeting. So if you think CI Hub meets 90% of the Oregon demand, we took the PDX fuel forecast and applied it to the rest of the state. And our understanding is a lot of that, almost all of it, there is only a pipeline connection to PDX. Everything else goes out of Portland via truck to serve the other regional airports.
Okay. Truck, but not rail? Just out of curiosity.
My conversation with the people at Kinder Morgan they said truck.
Okay. So it's getting trucked to Redmond and Medford and...
Yeah.
And
I don't think a lot of airports down there have rail connections to receive it on the other hand.
Yeah, right. So my second question is, you've proposed a discretionary review. Why not just exempt aviation fuel from the drawdown requirement?
I think the drawdown requirement is separate from that and would probably go hand in hand with, recognizing the need for that continued growth in the demand. But that's sort of a a separate issue. I think we're looking at, what capacity. Right now, we're, separate from the drawdown, we're saying everybody has to, there are no expansions allowed. And if we continue on that line, what the port is saying and pointing out is this is growing if our fuel demand curves are flat out to 2035 and jet fuel is being added on top of that, we're going to need a little bit more capacity to meet that jet fuel demand in 2035. Our calculations were it was on the order of, 2 or 3% of the entire capacity of the CI hub is that growth in jet fuel demand, potential jet fuel demand. So in theory, with all the modeling assumptions, that could be within a margin of error. It could be a operational adjustment to serve that. But then the port comes back to, but almost all of the jet fuel capacity has to go through Kinder Morgan Willbridge. All it goes through there to serve them. And so maybe we need to create a pathway that allows for a limited expansion to serve PDX. One alternative would be other terminals get into the jet fuel business, but they have to truck it out there to the airport as opposed to accessing the pipeline.
Spivak, and then I'd like to put myself in queue.
I was part of this work group, and I was sympathetic to the port needing more fuel. I am inclined to not just exempt it entirely. And I think that I'd be okay with limited. I think that their projections are very optimistic. It's hard for me to imagine in 10 years using 50% fuel, more fuel than they're using right now. But that is what they projected. So that's what this updated projection pulls from. There's also a proposal for exporting from Zenith to export fuels. So I guess where I'm sitting right now is that I'm okay with the limited expansion option here if we can write language so that this serves the port and doesn't just get used up by some other player. So that's a big if. If it's not possible to write language like that, then I'm probably going to suggest we leave things as is.
So sorry, if I can just jump in. So a different player, you're again concerned about the export to somewhere else.
You could, a big export business. They could actually get to it first and use up the 10 to 55 to 10% before the port even uses it.
But you're not talking about other airports in Oregon.
Oh, I'm okay with Oregon being served. Yeah, no, I'm thinking about exporting it to some other part of the country or the world.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to get that clear.
Well, I'm curious, what is the purpose then of, what is the PDX Fuels project serving in terms of capacity?
So they are planning for that future growth and being able to accommodate that future growth because all of that fuel has to land there and be distributed to the jets themselves. However, as been explained in the testimony, a lot happens before the fuel gets to the airport.
Sure.
And all of that happens right now, largely at the Kinder Morgan Willbridge facility in terms of the fuel settling, the blending, the testing that needs to occur before it gets sent out to the airport. And so what the port has described is essentially there has to be parallel facilities in the CI hub to be able to mix that and get that all rated and tested before it gets sent out to the airport.
And I hear that. I guess I'm curious. It seems to me on some level, and perhaps too elementary, that more tanks in the system equals a little more capacity for jet fuel. I mean, to me, that is basic math, but I might be
Yeah, how to put this.
I understand the
Yeah.
blending and the settling and like that
Yeah.
there's time-based, but,
But if PDX is going from 150 gallons or 100 gallons to 150 gallons, and Kinder Morgan is set up to supply 100 gallons, and PDX needs 150, Kinder Morgan or the CI hub needs to get up to be able to serve 150, to do all the blending and settling and everything to match the demand at PDX.
okay. Okay. It still doesn't, okay. Someday that will make sense to me. It does not make sense to me now. Other questions, Liz?
There was some testimony around sustainable aviation fuels, I think even from the port specifically. So did that factor into the work group conversation at all? Adding that as a specific requirement if additional capacity or leniency is given?
In my mind, sustainable aviation fuel or SAF is a subset of the overall jet fuel need because it's a replacement fuel. And so I think we're solving for the jet fuel issue, and then it's up to the companies to decide, do I want to use that for fossil jet fuel or sustainable aviation fuel?
I think the answer is no. We didn't talk about trying to do that. Yeah, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I guess sustainable fuels is still got all the characteristics of being flammable and dangerous when going to the river, and so I think I'm okay with treating it as one lump type.
So Commissioner Spivak has raised several times this question of fuels going somewhere other than the Oregon South regional market, including Oregon, Southwest Washington. How much export occurs now? Do you know?
We don't know. We don't have good data on that. And we can't regulate that. That is a interstate commerce issue.
Right.
So all we can regulate is how much gets built in Portland. It's up to the companies. They're free to figure out, do I send it to Eugene? Do I send it to Eastern Oregon? Does it stay here? Who do I want to serve? That's sort of up to them.
I mean, I agree with the concern. That's why I'm interested in whether it happens now, and we don't have the data that shows us. And you're saying there's not, I suspect you're right, but you're saying there's not a mechanism for us to directly regulate the destination of their products.
If we tried, we would lose in court. And that was the fossil fuel regulations were all litigated around that issue. And, we continued to sort of prevail that we are focused on the public health and safety impacts of the hub in Portland, and that we're not regulating the destination, the ultimate market for that fuel. And so far, we've prevailed on that approach.
And do you know if the state, either the legislature or the regulatory system, has tried to do that?
My understanding, and not an attorney, is that also at the state level. It
that's-
is a federal issue,
Right.
and it's embedded in the Constitution, and so we just don't want to.
Nobody's apparently paying attention to that now, so. So why start? Okay, sorry, that was a cynical comment.
Well, I'll maybe propose a challenge for staff, maybe consulting with the port to come up with a way of making sure that if we're going to provide a limited expansion for jet fuel, that the port can get it.
I think what we're trying to show with this is that what's the limit of expansion that creates enough capacity that essentially the port can bid on it, right? And not have this be just this what we have today is an unlimited, whoever wants to get in the game, whether it's for the port or the export or whatever. So at least, you know, with some sort of cap on the expansion, we're limiting our risk exposure for anybody that wants to do the expansion but is not going to serve the port.
Are these two separate proposals for consideration, just adding or allowing for an increase in storage capacity at the Kinder Morgan site versus providing a similar allowance for the CEI hub as a whole?
No, they're all in one. We were just breaking out, like, if you assume that Kinder Morgan Willbridge had to take on all or most of the responsibility for supplying the PDX, that, you know, something on this order helps get you there, you know, get you close to the 8 million gallons we think they might need. But that the actual regulation applies to all bulk fuel terminals. There's a sort of a fairness, treating everybody the same. We can't spot zone Kinder Morgan Willbridge and say, you get it, but the others don't.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little concerned about that if you build it, they will come. And if we're only after 8 million gallons and the additional capacity might be in the 18 to 37 million range, that seems like it opens up more possibilities for some of what Commissioner Spivak is concerned about.
In defense of staff on this one, they did say that if someone uses provision, there would be an approval criteria that they can only use it for jet fuel. So that I'm not sure that it completely addresses it, but it would be it wouldn't be someone could just like say, I'm building it for jet fuel, and then the next week start running something else through that tank. But I still have some of the concerns you've shared.
Chair Routh, sorry, I've had my hand up. I just wanted to, I just wanted to come back to this, and Tom, maybe you could clarify. If you could go to slide 41, the slide that has the jet fuel options. I think they're, just to clarify for Commissioner Thompson's question, I think there kind of are two suggestions there, and there's a couple of decisions within that, but one is to allow it by right. So just as, instead of saying there's no expansion, we'd say there's no expansion except for jet fuel at 5%. And I guess the other choice there is 5 or 10%. I understand your point about, you know, the 10% gets you, especially if you go up to 10%, it gets you a number of gallons that's in excess of what is anticipated, the need that is anticipated. So the two options, though, are allow expansion as of right, and then or allow expansion through a discretionary process, and those the approval criteria for that discretionary process would be similar to those of the capacity transfer review. So there's sort of a couple, you know, what percentage is one question, and whether the commission is interested in entertaining the idea of a by right, essentially exemption for that, or a potential exemption through discretionary review.
If we did a discretionary review, would it be possible to include a criteria that requires demonstration of local or regional benefit? And would that sort of...
Can I just ask, I think that for that question, we really need to take that back and talk more before we can give an answer on that. I think we've shared the concerns about interstate commerce and the ability to limit that. And we just need to go back and confirm more on that point. So I don't think we can answer that question right now.
Okay.
Jump in. I did think to some of the discretionary reviews, I think if it's possible to do it, a discretionary review, we've brought that up with regard to the transloading facilities. So the same answer would apply to both that topic and this one, I think.
Do people have a thought? Specifically, I'm hearing folks tend to be circling around discretionary review. Is there a strong thought one way or another? Okay. Yeah, okay.
You said you were going to come back with discretionary.
I think what I was saying is, we'll come back with this idea of, can there be an insertion in the approval criteria about only serving regional needs? I think if you could give us a sense, if you're interested in us writing out an amendment, a potential amendment language that's by right or discretionary, it'd be helpful to know that now.
I'm leaning
And
towards discretionary review. I don't know about how others are.
Anyone, yeah, Commissioner
If there's, if,
Sorry, I also want to put my 2 cents in. I would be interested in what the amendment language would look like for discretionary review.
Thank you. Spivak.
me too.
You have
Yeah, I want to see, my inclination would, that it would be by right, but if other people are interested in the discretionary review, I want to see what that looks like.
Okay. Do you have a preference?
We got to pick between one of the two.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's,
You can lean.
I mean, I'm leaning more by right, but I mean, if discretionary review makes sense, I'd look at that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amend my thing. I mean, if we can handle where the fuel goes, that the port gets benefits of it, then I'm fine with by right. But if that's easier to handle through discretionary review, or the only way to handle it through discretionary review, then that's we might fall back.
Am I correct? I feel like every question I have asked has been so elementary, so I am sorry if I have taken up time. But discretionary review would provide public involvement and by right would not, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I would be inclined,
Beyond the public notice
right, okay.
requirements that we're putting in place for
I would
new
say,
activity.
I think for purely the economic component, I would be more inclined by right, but I think that discretionary review, especially considering the passion and importance of this project and these tanks to community, I would be more inclined to discretionary review, purely for that reason.
It intersects well with the comprehensive plan and all the other leading goals for that. Also, the port has a robust lobbyist and a robust community engagement team. They have capacity for this. It's not like we're asking city of staff to hire to support that. Their community outreach team is wonderful. I'll just say that.
Well, I just want to make sure it's clear. You keep talking about the port, but we're talking about all aviation users. So the users may be distant from port. I just want to make sure we're not mixing. There's a category for the port and a category for everybody else. When you talk about aviation fuels and however we handle it by right or with a discretionary review, you're talking about all of the uses and all of the users in the state, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The idea is that in theory, we're providing enough capacity that, for all users in the state, if they grow like the port, PDX is growing, we could need up to 96 million gallons of additional fuel flowing through the system. We might need 8 million gallons of additional capacity. That's available to everybody, however the market chooses to serve those demands.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I think I've seen a majority going for review, but we have not taken by right off the table. Does that sound amenable? Okay.
Yeah. This is coming a little bit late, but we've spent a significant amount of time talking about the port. And so I just wanted to share a disclosure that I work for an architecture firm that does work for the port, has done work for the port, and may again in the future. We don't have any specific interest or tie to this issue, but erring on the side of caution.
They're going to attend my youth infrastructure fair. There's a disclosure. They're just nice people, but not
my
nice.
bag is my disclosure.
There you go.
I have a flight planned.
I flew on a plane yesterday. Does that count?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll work up these options and have something for the next meeting. I think that's basically what we had queued up to talk about today.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We want to know what we want to know. We know we have this issue to work through around the non-fuel hazardous materials and what we might be able to do there. We just wanted to give an opportunity. Are there other issues that we need to address and work on for March 10th? That you want to talk about today, or we set up a follow-up meeting, or something that gets us, something that looks like a fully baked amendment that you all can consider on March 10th as a way to try and get to a vote on a recommendation wrapped up on March 10th.
And to be clear, we are not making any amendments to the drawdown proposal, but we can, in an advisory capacity, make some statements in a letter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other? I'm so glad that we weren't under pressure to potentially vote on anything, because I was really not looking forward to that. So I'm so grateful to everyone who has come, to DEQ, to our friends at PP&D, to our Thought Bubble staff team, and again to Open Signal for their work in making us heard, and everyone who's feeling and sharing a lot from online. So thank you all. We will continue, this project is continued to March 10th at 12:30 p.m. And with that, we are adjourned.